So
Awesome.
take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for those who have your cameras on. It's always nicer to be able to see faces, but I understand if you don't want your camera on, no pressure. Thank you for having me for your class. And I went through all your questions. Thank you for them. I am going to just jump in with probably the most common questions that people ask. I've done a couple of these classes before, and I do like to get a couple of the main ones out of the way. And first off, everyone pretty much asks about writer's block. And frankly, I don't believe in writer's block. I think that when things are supposed to be scary, if you give them power and if you give them a lot of your mental energy and you pay attention to them, they just get bigger. So I did an article once about fear of spiders and how people were helping others get rid of their fear of spiders. And anytime you avoid spiders, your fear just gets bigger. So I think the same goes for writer's block. If you spend a lot of time thinking about writer's block and believing in writer's block, then it takes more power over you. And frankly, I don't believe in writer's block. I think most of the time when people think they have writer's block, it's because they really just don't want to do their assignment. I have that a lot. I have a lot of, I don't want to do my assignment, but it's different from, clinical writer's block. And in my first jobs in journalism, I was getting paid by the article, so I couldn't afford writer's block. I think one of the ways I have kept from it so far, knock on wood, is that I believe so strongly in deadlines that helps you ignore writer's block. It makes writer's block get very tiny and in the corner if you make a promise to never blow a deadline. When I applied to the New York Times, they did this thing called the Stations of the Cross, where you go and talk to like 9 different people to get through the first phase of interviews. And one of them, it was Al Siegel, John, who's sort of a legend. Mm-hmm. He was the guy in charge of protecting the New York Times style. He said to me, well, your editors say that you always make a deadline, and that's really impressive. And I sort of looked at him like, who at this level is applying to the New York Times and not making deadlines? But I guess there are quite a few of them. There are quite a few very highly respected journalists who will push their deadlines so tight that they get to skip over the copy desk, which is something I never had the courage to do. But you can set yourself apart as a good writer if you make your deadlines. And it helps your grades, because I know sometimes some teachers will reduce your grade if you miss a deadline. I just always thought if I said I was going to get it in on Tuesday, I was going to get it in on Tuesday. And that comes from being a journalist. It's very hard for journalists to lie because they tell the truth for a living. And if you get in the habit of lying, you're going to be an unemployed person. So that sort of falls into deadlines. I took them very seriously, and that has helped me avoid and ignore writer's block and basically not believe in writer's block.
So Tina, this is perfect because I just got done saying that all the papers for this class are due December 12th. They do not lose any points by handing in papers that were due in September then. But that's me trying to get them to set their own deadlines, but also the madness of all these other deadlines, and especially now with computers, where if they hand in an essay at 12:01 instead of 12, the computer says, boom,
Yeah.
So it's a different world, when it comes to that stuff.
That's mean. And yeah. I very much appreciate when teachers show flexibility with deadlines. I guess John doesn't know this or knows a little bit about it, but I am coming to you from a big journalistic disappointment which is that I was working on a book for 6 months and with a co-author, and the co-author came to the decision that she didn't have time to work on it anymore. So everything I've done for 6 months is basically not going to go anywhere. And I am currently looking for work, which I hate. I love working, and I love working hard. And now I have to start from scratch and figure out what the next big thing is for me. But one of the things that I was writing about was community college, public college, and the difficulties that students are going through, especially post-pandemic, financially and otherwise. And I ran across a professor who would let the students decide, pick a date for when each project was going to be due, because that way the students knew what their other classes' crunch times were and could create their own deadlines accordingly. And this professor also allowed 4 free extensions, no questions asked, basically, for projects, because the professor understood that it's super hard to be a student right now. And life gets in the way if you have kids, if you have people you're caring for, if there's a global pandemic going on, if you've lost your job. This professor had a little form to fill out, like how far along are you in the project, how much time do you need, any other concerns you want to raise, and nobody abused it. And it was so respectful of the students that I was excited to learn about it. So blah, blah, blah. Let me go back to your questions. And someone was asking, I'm just searching for, I put a little stars next to the ones that I wanted to answer, tried to do one for pretty much everybody. Oh, how do you weed out information, or how do you weed out necessary words? That was Josie's question that John said to me ahead of time. And I had a real interesting experience with that last week with 2 weeks ago with my son. He's writing his college essays, and he was so concerned about the word count. He's like, I can't add anything more to this essay because I'm already at 650 words. And I'm like, you're not at the right 650 words. The stuff that you have now, you can get down to 150 words and you could say stuff that's more interesting. So I think the power of a word count is very helpful when you're writing. You can, once you've got all your ideas down on paper, you get as much content in as you can, and it's amazing how much flab you can get out sentence by sentence by careful editing and revision. So John has heard me say, and it's not an original thought, but if you've all run across yet Anne Lamott, she was a wonderful, she still is, a wonderful writer about writing. And she's a huge fan of, pardon my French, but shitty first drafts. And it's very freeing to know that when you're sitting down with your paper, it's not going to be right the first time. Nobody gets it right the first time. Anne Lamott, who's like one of my favorite writers of all time, probably writes really awful first drafts. And part of the fun of writing, the part that I enjoy the most, which was somebody else's question, I think what was my favorite part, is when you can take a sentence and realize that, or a paragraph, and realize that you've been sort of clearing your throat too much in the beginning, not saying what you needed to say in the middle. You go sentence by sentence and realize that it really wasn't, it's not exactly what you want to say. I went through Drew's paper and I talked about passive voice. You can get rid of the passive voice immediately and almost automatically save like 3 words per sentence. And if you have 100 sentences, all of a sudden you've lost 300 words without having to give up what you were trying to say. So especially when I've had a co-author, it's been very fun to take their sentences, which come from either academia or social services or law. They write differently from how journalists write. So I could take their flabby sentence and make it into a real svelte one. And it was just sort of a game, because all of a sudden we had all that much more room to put more good stuff in. So I don't know. Have you ever done that with them, John? Do you ever take a shitty first draft and make it into a good second draft?
Well, we do it more like in very local ways where I'll take one sentence and say, look at all the words you can cut out of a sentence. And the other thing, we started by saying like, what Brian Garner writes an essay about, writers can learn to relax by not worrying about supposed rules, that when you're sitting down to write, if you have rules in your head, like anything, like never use the passive voice, it's going to paralyze you when you're getting your draft done.
Right.
So you can write shitty passive voice sentences, but then you go back. So it's like separating.
Yeah.
So
I love
yeah. So it's, I go back to, even in the pandemic, the one thing people would say, which I found really annoying, was they'd say, be safe. I said, no, I'm quoting Ms. Frizzle. Take chances. You remember the Magic School Bus?
No.
Yeah. Take chances. Now, telling people to take chances in the pandemic, you're like a social outlaw. But in fact, when you write, it's like take chances, right?
Yeah.
And write shitty first drafts, and then go back.
One thing I find is the order that I write in makes a big difference to me. So my best friend and I, she's an editor at NPR for climate, and she's a beautiful writer. I'm almost sad that she's editing now because I like reading her writing so much, but she would spend half a day on the lead. And I would never do that. I hate writing the lead. The lead is something I sort of put off till the end, unless it's a surefire thing, unless I can see my lead from a mile away.
Okay, just to get the jargon straight, by lead, you mean the introduction.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's so little journalism jargon, but that's definitely one of them.
Yes.
Because journalists hate jargon overall. It keeps the reader from the meaning. I would write my first part of the story, the top of the story, sometimes at the very end. I have a tendency to want to write the fun stuff first. And I am at peace with that because I know it works for me. If I come in from a reporting trip, or if I'm sitting down to write an essay, I'm going to write the parts that are the most fun, the biggest, the parts I'm most passionate about, the parts where I learn stuff first, because then I can do a word count and see like, oh, okay, I'm already 50 words in. I only have 250 words to go. So I'm on a roll, and I'm going to do the next easiest thing after that, and the next easiest thing after that. And while I'm doing the reporting, sometimes I'll just put stars next to what I want to, what I know is going to be the stuff that I'll write first. And then if I'm at 200 words, it's only another 50 words. I feel like I'm on the downhill slope, and that makes it a lot easier. So that's a little trick I play with my own head on how to get through a paper, because frankly, when I was in college, I hated writing papers. I dreaded it. I stayed up too late on it. I procrastinated. I did it at the last minute. I remember going a little nutty the first time I wrote a draft on a typewriter. Sorry, guys, I'm ancient, but in college, I thought, oh, I'll start doing drafts on a typewriter because then I can get it out faster. I could type pretty fast by then. But then I realized once it was in print, I actually believed it. And so I was believing my first drafts, my first awful sentences. And it took me a couple papers to adjust from making sure that just because it was in typeset, it wasn't true. It still needed to be fixed. But if you had told me back in college that I would sit down and choose to write for fun, I might not have believed you. I knew I was probably headed into writing because I'd done a lot in high school and college, and I loved reporting and I loved creative writing, but I hated papers. And sometimes I'll say to my husband and son, like, I can't believe I'm writing papers for a living. But on the other side of it is when it's the weekend and I have my discretionary time, a lot of times I'm sitting down and writing papers. I'm writing fun stuff. So that makes me happy when I sit and do that, because I realize like, oh, the stuff that I'm doing for pay is actually also the stuff that I'm doing for the shared pleasure of it. Does anyone have any questions? Because I just don't want to talk the whole time. If anyone has anything that comes up specifically from what I've talked about, I will get to as many of your questions as I can. But Madison, you have a hand up? Oh, okay. Oh, that's my cursor. It looks like a hand up. Sorry, Emmanuel?
You said something about finding big words or necessary words.
Oh yeah.
So like, how would you say like you improved your diction, or like if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a really good question, and it's a really good question for when someone's starting as a writer. The best way, I think, to work on that is to read a whole lot. There are two ways to get to be a better writer in my view, and one of them is to read a whole lot, and the main one is to write a whole lot. So what's worked for me, and this is over time, it's not it doesn't happen quickly, is anytime I run across a word that I don't know, I look it up and I sort of save it in a file just so I'll remember it next time. I love words. I love big vocabulary. I'm actually writing a poetry book about words. And I think that the more you look up, the more your vocabulary grows. The more you read, the more new words you'll run across. As a beginning writer, most of the time, if it's a word, I'd say 50% of the time that beginning writers are using a $10 word, they're pretty likely to be using it wrong or unnecessarily. So if you see yourself using a big fat word, ask yourself, is there a more smooth way to say it? Does this big word annoy your reader? Does it make your reader go to the dictionary? Or is this word the absolute best word for your purposes? Because when you're first trying out to write, a lot of times you want to impress people. You want them to think you're a good writer, and you think good writers always use big words, but a lot of good writers never use a big word. I mean, was it Hemingway? Or there's folks who are very, very plain spoken, but very, very excellent writers. And so I always get a little warning light flashing if I see a really big word with coming from a beginning writer. But that said, they're gifts. They are the fancier words are really out there for a reason, and you should use them. But the way to make sure you're using them right is to go to the dictionary when you discover them, go to the dictionary when you're using them again, if you're at all unsure, and double checking that the definition is exactly what you want. But I have also found a lot of times it's been very difficult to get big words past editors, particularly in journalism, because they don't want to send their readers to the dictionary necessarily. I remember I was writing a story, I think it was for the Philadelphia Inquirer, about composting, and it was a composting sewage plant. And I was speaking to the guy who was running it, and he was very happy to be running this sewer plant that was composting poo. And I said that he said his last comment with a coprophagous grin, which is this wonderful word that means shit eating. But I couldn't get that past the copy desk, even though it was the best word out there, because the copy desk didn't want to send people to the dictionary. And also it was a little bit naughty. So that was disappointing. But I find a lot of times if I have a big word that I want to use in journalism, if it doesn't get in journalism, I'll put it over in a pile for my poetry. So I come to you as a journalist and a poet, and sometimes it's better, the bigger words are more suited to creative writing than to journalism. And I don't know, how does it fall out, John, in the kind of writing that you're having them do? How often are they using $10 words, and what's your theory on it? You're muted. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, your microphone.
I muted myself because I coughed. I'm trying to like work with this Zoom thing. I haven't done it in a while. But yeah, what I always write is things like use plain English. And one of the essays they read is by William Zinsser, who wrote, as you know, on Writing Well. And he has, his view is like use plain English as much as possible. But always right, the big word sometimes is the perfect word. John Schwartz, who was a former climate change writer for the New York Times, found the word, I can't remember, it was a scientific word for how dense snow is and how it's getting less dense because of global, of climate change. And it was this word that sent into the dictionary, but that was a good one.
Yeah.
Because it was necessary. But yeah, it's, writing in a way that comes naturally. I mean, all this drunk and white stuff, avoid fancy words unless it's the right word. And of course, depending on your audience, I mean, when I'm talking to another drummer, I can talk about ratomacues and paradiddles, and it's perfectly clear. So, it's all about audience, obviously.
Ratomacues? What's that?
Ratamacue is this thing that sounds like this.
Okay.
Okay.
Writing that down because I like that.
No, don't remember that. Ask your son. So, but yeah, by the way, just to reinforce something at the, for the beginning, one of the first things that Abby Scher said to her class, to the class before this was, let go of beginning at the beginning, because it paralyzes you. It's about, beating so-called writer's block, where students just feel like, oh my God, how do I start? And it's like, start anywhere, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because you may also, if you think you're starting and going in a particular direction, that may not actually be the direction you're going. If you, I'm a big believer in following your enthusiasm. Whenever anybody in my writing group is excited about a particular project, even if I think it's totally goofy, you just tell them to go for it. If it's something that gets your engines revving, then that's the direction you should head, because that's where you're going to be writing the best, frankly. And someone had asked, I don't know if it was this class or the earlier class, like, what do you do when you have an assignment that you really aren't interested in at all? I try never to be in that position as a freelance journalist. I will only pitch stories that I feel like writing. I'll only say yes to stories that I feel like writing. And I learned that early on when I was looking for jobs. People were saying, don't, whatever you do, more of that will come to you. So if people are asking you to write business stories, but you don't want to write business stories, hold off and write something else, find another assignment of stuff that you want to call in more of to your assignment file, So I would always pitch stories that were in my passion areas. Like I'll pitch stories about hobbies that I really care about, rather than getting stuck doing an assignment on something that I don't want. Because writing about something you're bored with is hard. It makes everything harder. So Angelo, you have Angel, I can't tell if that's Angelo or Angel. There you go.
It's Angelo.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I was just gonna ask, because you said that in college you didn't see yourself having a writing career. It's kind of off the topic of what we were just talking about, but I was just gonna ask, like, what was your perspective change on writing itself that kind of opens you up to that area of life?
Well, it's funny. I applied to scholarships to study political science. I didn't get those, which is a good thing, because that's not really where my passions lay. I think I applied for those because I kind of wanted to be with my roommate, who I admired so much, who was headed in that direction. And it was sort of a blessing that I didn't get those Rhodes scholarships, which would have been lovely, but I would have been studying stuff that wasn't in my wheelhouse. I worked, my first job out of college was at a foundation giving away money from Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, which was real interesting, but sort of another thing that I did because my roommate had told me about foundation work and it sounded fun. And a second job after that was as a think tank writer. I was writing reports for a think tank that was trying to fix up the New York City public schools. That was really fun and more writing related. And then I moved to Philadelphia and took a job at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think because I'd always figured I'd want to build on writing in some way or another. And that was so much fun that I just kept going with it. When you're a reporter, you get paid to learn. And there's so much out there that we don't know about. I pretty much adored school. I liked learning and I wanted to get paid to continue learning, and I could do that as a journalist.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Let me look down for more questions. Ishmael asked, what's the most difficult part of your artistic process? And I think finding topics, finding assignments. I have a lot of things that I am pitching if I'm in freelance writing mode, which I sort of am now unwittingly. And it's hard to write pitches, research pitches, which takes a ton of time, and then sort of hope that somebody will say yes. So
Okay, now, once again, to deal with the jargon, what's a pitch?
A pitch is a little page saying, this is the story I want to write for you. Unfortunately, a lot of times when you write pitches, you get ignored and people don't write back to you. And that's sort of like my Achilles heel. I really hate being ghosted, not hearing back. So a lot of times you'll write to fancy magazines and not hear anything back. So it's hard to get, it's hard to keep your confidence up when you're sort of selling all the time. You want to be working, and sometimes people don't get back to you because they're busy and they have their staff writers, and they don't really respect freelancers as much as they could. What helps is to have, and this is what I'm going to do next week. I have an editor that I've worked. She's new to her position, but I've worked with the publication before. So we're going to sit down and talk, and I'll be able to hear from her what her hopes and dreams are, and then pitch from having had FaceTime with her, which is going to be really helpful. So I have about 10 ideas of stories I'd be happy to write. And if I listen to her and see what she's looking for in particular, then hopefully I can come away from that with a couple assignments and we'll have a little rapport built up.
Let me just kind of build on that, because again, but to remind my students, and Tina, you know this too, the whole point of this visit is for them to hear things from you that are going to help strengthen their writing. It's not like, oh, well, here's what Tina Kelley went through. You know, that's so hard. It's hearing that you, for instance, in their minds, like this incredibly successful writer, in my mind too, is still dealing with the stuff of like getting a bad grade. I mean, in this version, it's like, okay, we're not doing this book.
Right.
And it never gets easier, you know, and they read Dan Barry's article about William Zinsser, who at 90 is coaching writers like Mark Singer, who writes for the New Yorker, who are fretting over narrative. So that kind of never ends, right?
Yeah. It does get easier, I think, because I was saying this to my son. We both, my husband and I, have had some sort of like setbacks this week, and I said, you know, it does. I know what to do now. I know a little bit of the skills on how to get through the week or month or year of disappointment, which is how to keep yourself sane and cheerful, which I've often talked about in your class. For me, I know that, okay, I'm really disappointed that I'm unwittingly unemployed right now, but I know what to do. That's happened before, and books have fallen through before, and I know I need to go running every morning or do some sort of exercise because that clears my head and makes me less mopey. I know that I need to like eat well and make sure that I have time social time, because sitting home alone, I've been working from home since 2004 and I pretty much like it, but it's also, I'm an extrovert and I'm kind of an extrovert caught in an introvert's life. So I'm very chatty and outgoing and friendly, but like my only coworkers are my dogs, and that is sort of lonesome after a while. So for you guys, I would suggest doing what is good for your health. You know best what that is. For some people, it's meditation. For some people, it's yoga. During the pandemic, I think it's extra hard because people have been isolated and can't get out and do what they want to do necessarily, especially if you're a gym rat. It's hard if the gyms aren't open. But if that means getting out with nature, for me, that's a big thing. And I'll just take a walk if I can. You have to do what maintains the machine of your body, because if you are sitting around all day, it's really hard to stay cheerful and really hard to be efficient as a writing machine. So somebody, Madison, I guess, was asking, how do you find the motivation, inspiration to complete assignments or write about stuff that you don't care about, or topics you're not interested in? I think, I'm trying to think, that comes up in my poetry sometimes. Like I'll be writing a poem and I'll think, ugh, this isn't awesome. Like, I don't even want to go back and revise this. But my belief is you have to get through it so that the next thing can pop up. Like sometimes if I'm writing a poem that I think is like a B- poem, I'm like, okay, this is getting done with so that I can, so it's off the list of things to do, and it makes room for the next thing to come down. For assignments, like my motivation to complete assignments in college was to meet that deadline so I didn't get the 10 points off. Because even if it was a paper that I hated and I wasn't interested in and I didn't think I was doing a particularly good job on, I wanted the free 10 points for being on time. And that was enough motivation for me to get it off the list. I knew how I would celebrate when it was off my to-do list, and that would be enough for me to complete it. I also think, topics that you're not interested in, there aren't a ton. If you look at it, that there's something interesting in every topic. Like you can learn something useful from every topic and make a game out of it almost, to see like, okay, I hate accounting, but I have to interview this accountant. So let me see what on earth I can find interesting there, because I know there's something. I did a story for the Times about this guy in Idaho who was a reporter who did a lifelong series, a career-long series called Everyone Has a Story. And he would get the newsroom secretary to pick a random name out of the phone book every week. And he would call that person up and he would write a feature story about them. And every single time, even if it was the boringest person he'd ever met, every single time he got a story out of it and he got something interesting from them. He learned something new from them. So even if it's analyze a poem that you don't particularly like or write an essay on a topic, I think with John would probably give you a little flexibility on topics. So hopefully you're not writing about stuff you hate for John, but
Well, yeah, the way I try to make it so that doesn't happen, that they're stuck with a topic they don't like, is, some things are non-negotiable. Like you have to understand what you read, for instance. You have to show you understand it. But in the case of the William Zinsser essay, the prompt was, what makes him credible in talking about the topic of college pressures? And his essay begins with panicked notes from hundreds of students. He talks about how he listens to what deans say about conversations with parents conversations with students about their parents. And what I say is, find out where that resonates with you. So the part where it's Zinsser says, I talked to somebody and says, oh, you're pre-med. Why? It's like, well, my parents think I should be a doctor. What do you think? Well, they're spending a lot of money And then you could write about that because it's credible, because it resonates with you. And
Mhm.
it, because that's why what your parents are laying on you, but it's also, the idea that he's using actual experiences he's had talking to these people. He's not just saying, oh, it's my opinion that parents put pressure on their kids.
Yeah.
So, and the Pico Wire paper, it's like, well, how does Pico Wire say it's a good idea to periodically take a break from the internet by using his own experiences and also by citing Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, or whatever. And it's always like, find a way that you can connect it to your experience, which you can put in the paper peripherally. This is an argument I have with my fellow writing teachers back in the days when I used to talk to them, where they'd say, don't have their students write about their own experience. They can't handle it. So you can put your own experience
Yeah.
in it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I also have a little trick. I think someone had asked about how I schedule my day or how I actually sit down to write. I find myself sitting with my laptop many, many hours a day. Some of it is socializing after hours, but a lot of it is, working, finding stories to pitch, reaching out to people to do informational interviews on, reading up on what I'm interested in, writing, doing consulting work, doing editing work. But I learned from a friend about the Pomodoro method. I don't know if anyone's told you about this. It sounds corny at first.
They read John Schwartz's article, Learning to Learn,
Oh, okay.
and it
Okay.
lays out the Pomodoro. But tell them how you use it.
I use it religiously. I will sit for 25 minutes and do my chores on the computer. And then I will have a little list on a Post-it note on my computer off to the side on little chores I can do around the house for the 5 minutes out of the 25 after the 25 minutes are up. And it includes doing push-ups if I need to. It includes, cleaning the cat box. It includes taking stuff upstairs, doing laundry, doing something in the garden. But it's usually something I'm looking forward to. Like I'll sort of poke ahead and see what my to-do list has and what I want to do in my next 5 minutes off. And it means that, the basic requirement is it has to be something that you can do not sitting on your butt. And getting up and not being completely sedentary is very good for your health and also just very good for your brain. Like I find after a series of Pomodoros, at the end of the day, my living room looks a lot better and I've been more cheerful and productive in my writing. Another thing that I've tried to do with myself, because I need to, is paying myself to stay off social media. So if I will stay off, at first it was 8 hours and I've pushed it to 10 because it stopped being challenging. If I will stay off social media, basically for me, it's Facebook, for 10 hours a day, I'll give myself $2 at the end of the day and I'll save it up and buy something fun. So a treat, whatever that might be, chocolate or yarn or clothing or what have you. That got to be pretty easy. I was hitting that goal all the time. So the next one I laid on myself was counting how many of my Pomodoros I can do with as if I were on airplane mode. As if I had nothing coming in. I wouldn't check my personal email. I wouldn't check anything that wasn't work related on the internet, because I find myself going down a rabbit hole if it's something slightly work related, but then I see a link that takes me off somewhere else. And then I remember, oh, I should send an email to this friend before it's too late. And if I can stay totally off of the web, except for, research, then that's another little bonus for myself. If I can get a number of those airplane mode Pomodoros in, then I reward myself with extra quarters. So it's a stupid game, but it also is very helpful. It keeps me focused because it's hard to be focused when you're working, especially without coworkers.
And you're also addressing something that we've talked about in this class right from the beginning when they read How to Break Up with Your Phone. That this is, first of all, they are addictive substances. The phones are addictive. When I was teaching in prison, my students, many of whom were former heroin addicts, talked about how cigarettes were way harder to quit than heroin. And one of the reasons, besides the physical thing, is there wasn't, back in those days, there wasn't tremendous social disparagement of smokers. Like smoking at one point was cool.
Yeah.
So it's like people pull out their phones and unless you're with a lunatic like me, nobody's going to think it's odd that you're texting while you're talking to them. But
Oh,
that's,
I hate that.
yeah. But, speaking of writing about, what you're interested and involved in, somebody wrote about, it might have been Lucas, I'm not sure. You wrote you were particularly interested in the portraits of grief and how.
Oh, I was just on that one. I was
Yeah.
looking down for questions to answer. It was, well, Madison had one on that too, which is, what did you learn about yourself as a writer after writing the 9/11 pieces? I learned that like my skills as a poet were very helpful for journalism, because I was able to pick out what was interesting and new and tiny details. I think the ones that I did that I was proudest of had those kind of details that only fit with one person in the world. It was very hard to write about people at 9/11 who were lost in 9/11 because there was a great sameness to some of them. There was a whole 343 firefighters, and everyone you talked to said, like, oh, he would run into a burning building for strangers. And that's true of all 343 of those folks who died. God bless them. I mean, I wouldn't have the courage to do what they did, but writing that does not differentiate them and show their beautiful uniqueness as human beings. But, and the same with the bond traders. There was a whole bunch of folks who all worked at the same company, and there were sort of similarities, like they would light up the room when they walked in the room. They were outgoing, and I noticed, like, all of a sudden all the Cantor Fitzgerald folks, people were sort of saying the same things about. But one of them, the widow said, he would pick up our son and strum him like a banjo, and now I'm not strong enough to do that. And I just was floored by that. That's such a precise, beautiful image in your brain of the dad playing with his son in this joyful, playful way. And I was just sort of slain by that. And I'm like, okay, that's obviously going in. That's going to be something that I'm going to build the whole piece on. I think because I was used to sort of listening for that poetic detail. And also I was used to writing very concisely, because poetry, you can't have flab when you're writing a poem. Your workshop group will help you get rid of all the extra words in a poem, because a poem is something where you don't have a ton of space, really. I mean, you could write a long, flabby poem if you wanted, but poetic language has to be very concise and artful, and every word has to count because there are fewer words. I think I learned from Portraits of Grief that was that there was actually a very good benefit to poetic skills in journalism. And I also learned, just as a human, it made me think, and I learned it from writing Metro briefs back in the day, these little 3-paragraph bits of news about, usually it was about weird ways people had died in the past day. It was like police blotter. I learned that, like, wow, it amazes me when people are surprised when people die. In the course of a day in the life of a big city like New York, people die all sorts of random ways. And like, we all should expect that on some level. It was a very morbid thought, but I remember, like, when my dad passed away at 85 and he'd had a heart condition for 44 years, and people were like, oh, we're so surprised that he died. I was like, how, like, haven't you guys paid attention? Like, everybody dies one way or another. And like, if someone gets run over by a garbage truck, yeah, that's surprising, but like, it's kind of inevitable too. I don't know, maybe, I think it made me morbid, and it made me a little bit of a safety chick, according to my husband. Like, if you read about people, or if you're writing about a lot about people who are rollerblading with headphones on and getting hit by garbage trucks and dying, it sort of makes you pretty cautious about rollerblading with earphones on. So that was something I sort of learned about myself and my attitude towards death from
So,
being.
Tina, so to start to interrupt, but the last essay they're going to be writing for my class after they write about how Tina Kelley's visit can strengthen my writing by what she says. They're reading 2 essays, one by Oliver Sacks called My Own Life,
Oh,
which is he wrote it on learning that he had been diagnosed with cancer and was not going to live, and
Wow.
Alice Sebold, who wrote Living with the Dead after 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. And their prompt is about how both of these writers write about how knowing about the inevitability of death will help you to live life to your fullest. So
Yeah.
it's the opposite of morbid.
yeah, there are benefits to that. I think I see that in myself. It's like, oh, I get extra happy having made it through another day because the odds aren't really on our side. And maybe it came from watching, did you ever watch 6 Feet Under?
No.
It's a wonderful series about a funeral home, and somebody has an obscure death at the beginning of each episode. And I was watching that about the same time I was watching 9/11, I was writing the 9/11.
Oh, wow.
But I digress. And this is one benefit of working at home. You get to have your cat on your lap. I hope
Right.
that's
By the way, Ted Turner I saw an interview with him with David Frost years ago, and Ted Turner was this billionaire, if you guys haven't heard of him, but David Frost asked him, he said, it's very odd because you're this very well-known, highly photographed billionaire, and you never have security. You travel all of these places in the world with no security. And he said, no, I don't want security because I'm ready to die. As a matter of fact, I have my line ready, which I'm going to say if somebody's going to like kill me, some terrorist. And what I'm going to say to them is, thanks for waiting so long.
right. That's the way to look at it.
Yeah.
Mary had a question on how do I stop myself from repeating information? Maybe I don't, but I know my second readers do. And this is a very important point I'd like to make for everybody on how to be a better writer, is to have writing buddies or writing audiences, or your first readers who will look at your draft and tell you what it's missing, tell you where it's confusing, tell you where you're repeating yourself. Because nobody gets it right the first time. I would never send out a poem without having my writers group workshop it first. I don't see my own blind spots in my writing, but I know they're there. And if it's a family member, if it's a classmate, if it's a sibling, if it's somebody who's going to be kind, don't do it if you don't have somebody who's going to be kind. I ran across that in college with a poetry. I found most of the poets in my classes at school were snotty and pretentious and not really on my team. And it took me too long to find folks as an adult who were all in it to just write better stuff. My in-laws are awesome first readers. They're former professors. They have spare time. They are kind for the most part. And they are very helpful in getting me a sense of like, does this make sense? Is this interesting? Am I repeating myself? If you look really hard to find somebody who will do that for you, it'll take a little of the pressure off of you. Like, you don't have to be perfect in your first draft or second draft because you have an extra set of eyes as an emergency backup. That's a very helpful way to take some of the fear and stress away from your writing. An extra audience member is just really worth their weight in gold. And it might be a parent, it might be a friend, a roommate, it might not. I mean, it might be just someone across the room in your class or across the Zoom room in your class who's, trying to get better along with you. And you can say to somebody like, just, can you read this and I'll read yours? And we'll have a sense of if we're going in the right direction. And set the rules, keep it constructive. Don't invite negative energy around your writing. That sounds very sort of woo-woo, but it's true. I don't want snotty people who don't wish me the best reading my first draft.
And do you feel like it can be permanently kind of scarring to people to be criticized?
If it's not constructive, it can be really, I mean, yeah, I think like I remember hating other poets in college just because they were all so sort of snotty and competitive. But now that I have a whole bunch of mostly older than me women who are very experienced poets, but also very kind. We have this group of 7 of us that meets every 2 weeks, and nobody's mean. Nobody has to love everybody's first drafts, but even if I hate somebody's first draft, I usually have something useful and kind to say about it. It's really worth its weight in gold, to have somebody to bounce your writing off of. And that will help you with, how do I meet my deadline? Because usually you'll give it to your writing buddy a day or 2 before the deadline. So it gives you a little time. I always find if I have a story that I'm writing that's hard, I benefit from sleeping on it. Like, I don't like to hand it in right after I finished it, because I'll usually find something better the next day. So I'll be able to polish it the next day almost every time. So if you're giving a draft to your writing buddy and then you're rereading what they say and what your new thoughts are, that gives you just a little bit more perspective on it. One other thing I wanted to say, which is that basically 96, this was a Sturgeon's law. There's a bunch of laws named after people, and some guy named Sturgeon came up with this law that said 96% of everything is crap. And at first I thought, oh, that's terrible. Like 96% of my articles are just awful. But then I realized, like, that's probably only 4% are going to be truly memorable. And it lowers the stakes a little bit. Like, if you're sitting down and writing something, 100% of your stuff isn't going to be great, even if you're Dan Barry or even if you're Zinzer or Anne Lamott. The stuff that I remember is probably 4% of what they've written. This the stunning stuff. And in the course of your life, if you write 100 pieces, you'll have 4 stunners. That's kind of comforting. It takes the pressure off the first draft, and the first it gets away some of that perfectionism that writers have. And perfectionism is very toxic, frankly. It's the perfect is impossible, and if you sit around trying to be perfect, well, it's just not, it's not a lovely expectation to have. It's a difficult expectation, and it's probably not going to be met by any of us in life.
Okay. Can I just add, I mean, because we're sort of coming to the end, this time always goes by so quickly. And again, when I said to my students, this is always the favorite class because they get to hear so much less of me and more of you, but it's like, wow, she's a real writer, you know? When you did the story about the gender change, that principle,
Yeah.
the issue came up, Christopher Melendez raised, oh no, it wasn't Chris, it was my other class, sorry. Or maybe you did, but about what I was saying was, you clearly have your own political beliefs, but when you went out to cover that story, and you started by saying journalists tell the truth, which I totally believe you do.
Yeah.
The quotations that you had maybe in the 3rd paragraph, where you had the 2 people who were completely against this gender change, and you put their quotes in, but the quotations near the end, the kicker, which is the ending, were all saying people don't think it's a big deal. So we have to kind of take on faith that you, as an honest person, didn't hear like everybody saying this is awful, but because you have your own political views, you were going to just, downplay that. So can you talk about how you like choose the quotes and, to tell the truth, basically?
What I left after doing that reporting, and it was hard reporting because, like, I wasn't allowed on school grounds. It was the first day of school. The principal didn't want to talk to me. The principal wanted learning to happen and the first day of school to go on as usual. And I totally agreed with that decision. I hate being a pest. I hate getting in the way of what people are trying to do. And so I was trolling I was almost picketing in front of the school, waiting for people to walk out. And the security guards were looking at me and sort of like, I knew if I went into the school grounds, they would chase me off. I was waiting for people to come by, and it was hard because it was, I was on deadline and I wasn't sure I was going to get enough stuff. But what I came away from in that reporting was the folks who were kind of the haters. And I remember somebody said it was like despicable, but they didn't use the word right. They were a little bit ignorant in their vocabulary of their hatred of this transgender person. The kids I talked to at the end were the ones who I wanted to leave it on that note because it was so hopeful. And I thought, the haters were all in their 60s, and the students who were saying like, more power to our principal's living their true life. We admire her for making this brave change. And I thought, the haters are going to die off. And 50 years from now, it's just going to be these young people who grow up and run the world. And I felt very sort of like hopeful about that. And I wanted to structure the story that way, that the haters had their conversation in the beginning, but the moral of the story was that the students stood by their principal.
Okay.
And I had my editor talk to me about, well, we need to know why this person had a sex change. And if you can't talk to her, you need to talk to her relatives, and you need to go to her relatives' houses and ask them why they had a sex change. And you need to talk to their neighbors. And I'm like, dude, people have sex changes because of gender dysmorphia. I mean, it's not because of there's only one reason really. And I was sort of having to go against my editor's point of view, which seemed a little less empathetic than I would have hoped. So I remember crying in the car because she wanted me to spend the night and I wanted to get home because my daughter was starting first grade the next morning, and I'd promised my daughter I'd be there for the first day of school. And it was one of those. But I was proud of the story at the end. And I think it was structured to show that hopefulness that the kids who really matter were behind their principal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we're almost out of time, but now I see Ariel, who writes poetry herself, has a chat. When writing poetry, especially at a random moment in time, what do you focus on?
Oh, I think I'm a little different from many poets this way. And it came from having little kids and not having much time for creative writing when I was working at the Times. I don't wait around till I'm inspired, because it would never happen. Anytime I hear of something or think of something or hear a song lyric wrong or find a new word that I want to use someday, I put it in one file in my computer. And then because of my writing group meeting once every 2 weeks, I kind of have a built-in deadline of trying to get 2 poems ready for that writers group every time. So when I sit down to meet that deadline, because I hate going without poems to workshop, I just go to that computer file and see what sticks together. So it's a lot of random moments in time focused or all put in one computer file where I can look through it and see. Usually they'll sort of, a couple of the phrases or images or ideas will resonate among themselves in the most recent sort of top of the file. And I'll look down and see I'll have a list of possible topics for poems. And then I'll just sit down and try to collect a bunch of images in that topic. And then I'll try to put together a poem. But I'm very seldom, I'm inspired to write a poem and I'm going to go do it. If I had to write a poem with a blank piece of paper, I would freak out. I would not be able to do it. But if I can go to this file, which I printed out in case the power goes down ever, I can look at it and see what's working for me as a possible topic in among the recent things I want to put in a poem someday. And if I have a topic, if there's a contest, like there was a deadline, a call for manuscripts on bliss and joy, and I could look through, I could search for those keywords in that file. So it that could help me get on a particular topic. It's very handy. I recommend trying it sometime to have a sort of, it's your palette. If you're an artist, these are all your colors in one place that you can play around with.
Okay, that's great. And, John Trimble, for you guys, remembering his advice, he talks about stockpiling data. Just get as much fuel for the fire as you have, and then when it's there, it's easier to write. So
And I do that with journalism too. I keep a lot, like when I was working on this book on college, what I would collect into my computer file was usually data, stats. Whenever I learned something, I just sort of, for my reading, I would cut and paste it and put it over in my file with whatever the link was where I'd found it for footnote purposes. And yeah, it's a good thing.
yeah, and writing your papers, that it could apply to that. So listen, we could obviously continue on and on, but Tina, remember you're coming to another class at 1:15.
Yes, sir. So do you want me at 1:15 or 1:30?
Well, I prefer 1:15 if you can handle it.
Sure.
Okay, that's nice. You say sure. So, yeah, it was great. And if anybody has what, you guys can obviously thank Tina with words spoken if you'd like. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
You're welcome.
Very much.
It's always
Thank
fun for
you.
me.
Yeah, and really, again, remember, it's not one of these things where some lady came to class and she talked about her writing and blah, blah, blah. No. This is, speaking of vampires, you guys should be like vampires and you should drink her writing blood. So get nourished by whatever she said that resonates with you, whether it's writing shitty first drafts, which is Anne Lamont's idea, or, anything at all. Definitely taking care of yourself physically. I'm all for that.
And mentally. So sometimes that's meditation or walk in the woods or just quiet time, just maintaining yourself, especially given how hard it is to be a human being right now.
Yeah. So that's it. And let you guys go 2 whole minutes early, and we'll talk about this visit in person on Thursday, which I prefer, obviously. And I'll see you around. Okay, Tina?
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And I'm recording this, guys, so I'll let you know how to get it, stopping the recording. And it'll be available